welcome to episode 15 of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we've got a lot to discuss for you. So, this is our episode that is going to be breaking down the incoming freshmen for this coming season for Alabama basketball. This is to go in line with the transfer portal breakdown that I did last episode. And ideally, if we get the decisions that we are expecting out of Jaron Stevenson and Mark Sears ahead of the May 29th decision, this will be all of the newcomers to Alabama basketball. The combination of the transfers discussed last episode as well as the 4 incoming freshmen that I'm going to discuss this episode. I will give everybody just a little bit of housekeeping and let you know that no matter the decision, I will be recording an episode next week to break down the decision that takes place with Mark and Jaron. If they're coming back, then I'll discuss obviously what that brings. If they're leaving, then I'll discuss where Alabama might turn with them no longer being on the roster, as well as discuss the schedule that's coming out. There's been a few more teams that have been added to the schedule, so I've been letting some of that information just kind of seep out. And we've gotten the conference splits for next season. We've been still getting some more non-conference games. So I've been trying to let some of that information come out so that I can do one big breakdown and break down all the conference opponents as well as all the non-conference opponents. You know, what I really like about the schedule, where I think, the schedule could prepare us for next season. So just as a heads up, that's what we have on the horizon. I'll be recording that episode, like I said, probably, very beginning of June, right after the Jaron Stevenson and Mark Sears decisions. They have until May 29th to make their decisions, if they're going to withdraw from the NBA draft or if they're going to be keeping their names in the draft, and Alabama will be having to look elsewhere. But as I mentioned, for today's episode, we're going to be discussing the incoming freshmen. So for the incoming freshmen, we have a 4-man class. And per On3, and depending upon where you look, Alabama is either ranked 2nd or 3rd in recruiting for that 4-man class. They're headlined by 5-star Derrion Reid out of Atlanta. He played for Prolific Prep, which will be a theme. You'll also hear another name coming up that also played for Prolific Prep. That's also going to be the high school that A.J. DeBansa plays at, a bigger commit that everybody's looking for 2025. There are quite a few guys that play over at Prolific Prep. It's a really big boarding school for basketball for anybody that's unaware out in California. So that's going to be where Derrion played his high school ball, especially at the end. He's as I mentioned, he's out of Atlanta, Georgia. He's going to be a 6'7", 6'8" wing. I would say he is a more athletic version of Brandon Miller. Brandon, I think, is probably a little bit better of a three-point shooter, whereas I think Derrion is a little bit more physical, a little bit more muscular. He has a little bit of additional weight. He's at 6'7", 200, whereas I think Brandon was more in the 6'8", 190, 200 realm. I think Brandon was a little skinnier, whereas I think Derrion has the ability to take a little bit more contact and plays through contact. If you watch any of the EYBL or any of his games when he's at Prolific, he's not afraid of contact, and he also uses his body to get physical on defense. And I think that's the big place where Alabama is better this year, and will be better this year, is on the defensive end. Obviously, part of that goes to who they've brought in the transfer portal, with Cliff and some of the other guys that they have returning, Grant Nelson. But I think Derrion Reid's going to be a huge piece of that. It would not shock me if we see Derrion Reid starting day one. It also would not shock me if he's coming off the bench at the beginning. I think either way would not shock me from a Derrion Reid perspective. But personally, if it was to garner a guess, my gut would say I believe that Derrion Reid starts day one. And I really think that the wing 3 is Derrion Reid's to lose. I think that for what Nate wants to do, for the length, the athleticism, the pass, dribble, and shoot, the ability to kind of create on your own, the ability to, set up others, play physical defense. I think that Derrion has all of those things. I think that Derrion is perfect for what Natos wants to do. I think that Derrion is, he is a little bit more of a mid-range specialist, or at least was in the EYBL, but that's something we saw with Brandon Miller. Brandon Miller shot substantially more threes at Alabama than he ever did in AAU or in high school. I would assume we're going to see some similar things with Derrion Reid. Again, I'm not calling Derrion Reid Brandon Miller. I don't want anyone to think they are the same player. I don't want anybody to put the expectations of Derrion Reid as he has to be a second-round pick or bust. But I think that in Nate Oates' system, I think Derrion Reid has the capability of being a one-and-done lottery pick kind of guy. I think that is well within the realm of possibility of Derrion Reid. I think that he absolutely could be a lottery pick in Nate Oates' system. He absolutely has the skill set, the body, the archetype that the NBA is looking for. And I think that in the system that Nate Oates runs, he will be able to show that skill set to be able to show that he could be a 2 and 3 guard, or a 2 or 3 in the NBA, and be successful for a long time in the NBA. And that's really what they're looking for. And so I really do think that Derrion has the ability to be a one and done kind of guy. I don't want to put that level of expectation on him that, he's either a lottery pick or bust. I wouldn't go quite that far, but my personal expectation of him, and I wouldn't be let down if this isn't achieved, but my personal thoughts on who Derrion Reid would be is probably somewhere between a 20 and 20, maybe even more than that, maybe 24 to 28 minute guy. I think he's going to be a fairly high usage guy for Alabama, and he's going to be more than likely the starter at the 3, and he's going to be used, again, in a somewhat similar way to Brandon Miller. I'm not expecting them to be used the same way. I think Derrion is probably a little bit more adept to contact. I think he probably thrives through contact a little better than Brandon did at the time. But I think that is where I would expect Alabama to use a guy like Derrion Reid. So shifting from Derrion Reid, the second prospect that Alabama has signed is somebody that you hear Nate Oates talk about all the time. When you hear him talk about the incoming freshman and the style of basketball that he likes to play, you will often hear Aiden Sherrell's name pop up. He's a guy that was out of Detroit. He played also at Prolific Prep, as I mentioned, that Prolific Prep thing. Aiden is a guy that has all the capability that Nate Oates wants. He's officially listed at 6'11", 220. My personal instinct is that Aiden's going to need to gain a little weight to be able to truly hold his own down low with some of the size that we encounter in the SEC. It would not shock me if we see him struggle a little early in the season against some of the better teams that we play if they have a really dominant big man where Alabama is having to maybe help with the 4. Maybe have Grant Nelson help or something like that, similar to how we saw Jared Stevenson. Jared Stevenson early in the season against Clemson got absolutely destroyed by Shefflin last year. But then Jared Stevenson, when they played Clemson in the Elite 8, Jared Stevenson had a great game, right? So I think it's a situation like that where, you see a freshman that just has to gain some weight, gain some maturity, gain some just knowledge of how people are going to play against them and gain some strength. I think Aiden, obviously, because Jaron reclassed, it's a little bit different because Aiden has an extra year on him. But I do think it's a situation where Aiden will need to gain a little weight. But what Aiden does is he's an elite shot blocker. He can absolutely drain the 3. And he is a rim runner, right? He can pass, he can dribble, he can shoot, but he can also rim protect, right? And at the end of the day, that's what Nate Oates wants. Is he would love to have 5 guys who could pass, dribble, and shoot, but he wants his 5 men to be able to rim protect. The way that they want to play defense is they want to be able to have their guards be able to kind of gamble a little bit because they have a big man down low that can erase mistakes. That's what you saw when we had Charles Bediako. That's what we're hoping to get out of Cliff Amori. That is what Aiden Sherrell brings to the table. Aiden Sherrell is clearly going to be the backup to Cliff. So Aiden I do not think will be starting hardly at all this season, barring an injury in the front court. But I do think Aiden is going to play substantial minutes. I think that the speed at which Alabama plays isn't super conducive to having one big man play 30 minutes, right? We see that out of our guards, but even last season when you saw Latrell Wrightsell go down, you saw the issues that came up with Mark Sears and Aaron Estrada playing minutes that they maybe weren't used to, right? They were playing closer to 38 to 40 minutes, and it was just more than they were really built to handle. It would be better for our guards to play in the 32 to 34 range, right? So that they're getting some level of rest during the game. I think on the big man standpoint, I would expect, obviously, Cliff to get more minutes than Aiden, but I would still expect Aiden to probably get somewhere between 18 and 22 minutes, right? I could definitely see lineups where we go a little, where, we even slide Aiden to the 4. I think that it's really going to depend on the Jaron Stevenson front, right? If Jaron Stevenson comes back, I think that you're really going to have Aiden playing the 5 mostly. And you're going to have Grant and Jaron playing the 4. You're going to have Aiden and Cliff playing the 5. But if Jaron Stevenson decides to stay in the draft, I could definitely see lineups because of Aiden's shooting ability that you play Cliff and Aiden together if you have a team that, maybe has some better big men and you're not as worried about fouls. I think that Alabama is going to have the flexibility to play the lineup how they want, right? I think that, again, the majority of the time Aiden is going to be playing the 5. And if he does that, his minutes are probably going to be slightly limited due to the fact that obviously we have Cliff. So it would not shock me if, without Cliff, Aiden was a, mid to high 20 minute per game guy versus with Cliff, if he's a, 16 to low 20 minute per game guy, right? Because obviously there's going to be, without foul trouble, there's going to be limitations on how much you're able to play somebody, right? Nate doesn't like to substitute just for the sake of substituting, but he also wants to play fast. And typically, your big guys are going to be the ones that's conditioning not goes first, but just due to the size, they're not able to run for a full 40 minutes at the speed that Nate Oates wants to run. So it would not shock me if Aiden got a few extra minutes than Cliff would get in some other system, just because Oates plays so quickly. I think in some other systems it wouldn't shock you if Aiden only played, 10 to 12 minutes a game. I think Oates is going to get him more than 10 to 12 minutes a game, right? I think that is very clear. I think Oates really, really likes Aiden's game, and he's going to find him more than 10 to 12 minutes per game. And if nothing else, it's going to be keeping fresh legs on the big guys so that they're always at their freshest and always at their best when you go down the stretch. Because Alabama, it has a schedule, and we'll talk about it in the next episode, that is elite. Alabama is, again, going to be playing one of the toughest schedules in the country. Looking ahead, you're already looking at playing Ryan Kalkbrenner. You're looking at playing Purdue. I'm sure they're going to have some big guys. You're looking at playing Illinois. You're looking at playing Houston, which is super physical. You're looking at playing, obviously, the SEC slate. There's a lot of games that Alabama is going to be playing where big men are going to be very, very important, right? We saw the importance of big men even in March, right? Guards carry you in March, but big guys play a huge role. Grant Nelson had a huge game against Carolina. Jaron Stevenson had a huge game against Clemson. Pringle, huge game against Clemson. So these guys have to play these huge minutes down the stretch, and being able to keep them fresh is going to be absolutely paramount. So I think that Aiden plays more minutes than he would in a more traditional system. And in NATO's more fast-paced system, I think Aiden's going to get some really good minutes. I'm really excited to see what we see out of him. I think Aiden, like I said, if you hear NATO's talk about Aiden and in the skill set that he brings to the table, it is something to watch. So I think Aiden is somebody that you're really going to want to keep an eye on. And in terms of projection of, do I think that he's a one and done? I think that there's a possibility, but personally, I look at Aiden as a 2-year guy. I look at Aiden as somebody that will this year be playing behind Cliff and, gain some weight, gain some size, gain some maturity, gain some intelligence about how the college game and how the higher level game is played at the big man position. And then next season is when you really may see the breakout out of Aiden, and then I think maybe a 2-year guy. Would it shock me if he went one and done? Not exactly. He has the shooting capability. He has the size. He is absolutely capable of that, but I would think more of like a 2-year guy, just, due to lineups, due to what we're going to ask of him this season and what he's going to be able to showcase this season. Personally, I would think more of like a 2-year guy. Then, moving on down our rankings, so just to make sure we're on the same page, in terms of On3's industry ranking, which is where they compile all of the rankings of the 4 major recruiting sites, On3, 24/7, ESPN, and Rivals, Derrion's listed at 16th in the country, ranked recruit. Aiden is 23rd in the country. Depending upon where you're looking at Derrion, he's somewhere between 11 and 18. Aiden is somewhere between 19 and 30. Rivals has him much higher than like a 24/7. Then you go to one of the more controversial prospects, let's say, in Naas Cunningham. So Naas Cunningham played for Overtime Elite. You may recognize the name because he actually was a former number 1 overall prospect. A couple of years ago, before he went to OTE, he was the number 1 ranked prospect in the country. A lot of the reason of the fall in the recruiting ranking is because of him going to Overtime Elite. There is a perception, and a truth that comes with Overtime Elite's competition is not at the level that you see with a Link Academy or Prolific Prep. The 2 high schools that the other 3 recruits came from. Sneak peek for the final recruit. And so there is a perception that Overtime Elite is not at the same level, and it's true, right? And so competition and the ability to progress typically causes people that go to Overtime Elite to have a drop in recruiting rankings. And we saw that from Naas Cunningham. That does not take away from his ability and what he was as the number 1 overall prospect, right? It's not to say that he had some type of legal trouble. We've seen something like that with some other, high-profile guys. They have legal trouble, or they have, some type of behavioral issues that you start hearing pop up that we're aware of. We haven't heard of any of that with Naas. So this is purely a Overtime Elite causing a drop in recruiting rankings. And it's understood, right? However, what it means is you're getting a guy that at one time, and still kind of, they were uncommittable offers at the end, but he held offers from basically everyone. Your Kentuckys, your Kansases, your Dukes. He held an offer from everyone. So with all 4 guys we're going to talk about this year, all 4 guys are capable of playing at very, very high major schools. And that's something that you don't always hear about with Alabama basketball recruiting. Sometimes there is a recruit that Alabama takes, and it almost feels like they took them because Alabama was the only option. This was not the case with any of the recruits this season, right? This was absolutely a case where Nate Oates looked and he got the absolute best person at each position for the skill set they were looking for, right? It was a situation where it wasn't like Alabama struck out on 25 people and now there's this person that, went to, someplace, obviously John Petty's, had a great career, but like a John Petty, right? I don't think he had the same level of, he was a high-ranked recruit, but I don't think he had the same level of recruiting coming out of high school that like any of these guys did. Or an Alex Reese, right? Alex Reese had an awesome career at Alabama. I have a really cool video that I posted on Twitter back from the Alabama-LSU game when Alabama won its first SEC title in quite a few years of Alex running through the confetti. Alex was elite. He did a great job. But Alex Reese, at the end of the day, the contribution that he made to Alabama basketball was largely Alabama. He kind of fell in Alabama's lap being from Pelham. It wasn't like we went on a we went on a big board and the number one ranked person that we wanted happened to be from Alabama, right? That wasn't a situation. And I think what we're noticing on some of these recruits is a lot of these recruits just perfectly fit our skill set and what Alabama wants. And so it's a standpoint of, Nate has done this time and time again. Nate has not been one that you will talk about this as much. This is much more of an indictment on your Avery Johnsons, your Anthony Grants, your Mark Godfrey's, some of your past Alabama recruiting. So, I may be preaching to the choir when I'm saying this, but this is a standpoint of this is not a recruit that just fell into your lap. This is a recruit that you went out and got because their skill set fits what Alabama basketball wants to do, and they want to be here, right? And we'll talk about that want to be here. That's really, really important with the last recruit that I'm going to talk about. So Naas Cunningham, just kind of what he is, who he is. He's 6'7". He's officially listed at 6'7", 180. He's another wing prospect, a shooter. He's absolutely going to need some weight versus a Derrion Reid. Like he absolutely, Naas is probably going to need at least 15 pounds probably. Naas Cunningham is, in my mind, probably the biggest wild card in this class. And by wild card, I don't mean it in a bad way. By wild card, I mean that my expectations of him are not really fully thought out, not fully formed, because it would not shock me if Naas Cunningham had some breakout games and just lit it up from three. I've seen the shooting capability at Overtime Elite. We often will see videos pop up. You hear things. You see practice tape. You see different games at Overtime. He's, talked about working on defense. So clearly the motor is there, but it's somebody that I don't know fully what to expect his freshman season. The competition at Overtime Elite has you a little unsure of how able to contribute he will be this season. It's also a standpoint of, on a list of, if you were to list out Alabama's roster 1 through 13, and I'm going to include Jaron and Mark for the sake of this discussion, somebody has to be numbers 11, 12, and 13. Even if they're really, really good and could start somewhere, somebody still has to be number 11, 12, and 13. And currently, 11, 12, and 13, by my estimation, are some combination, and I don't know the order, of Diabate, Cunningham, and Philon, the last recruit we'll talk about here in a minute. And when you're discussing a former number 1 overall recruit that, again, played at a place like Overtime Elite, so even though the competition isn't as good as a Prolific Prep or a Link Academy, it's still better than your average high school, right? It's still going to be better than your average high school. It's a standpoint of these guys are really good. The roster is absolutely stacked. So from a playing time perspective, his is the one that is probably the most difficult for me to guess. My gut instinct says he's going to play somewhere between 6 and 12 minutes a game, average for the season. That's what my gut instinct says. I could fully see where there are games that he doesn't play at all. I could fully see games where he plays a ton. I would almost think, in a sense, of the way that Davin Cosby was used last season prior to his injury, where there were games that he absolutely was called on and was absolutely needed, and there were games that he wasn't used at all. That's kind of what I suspect out of Naas Cunningham, but I could be absolutely wrong. All I know is he has the capability of being a defender. He wasn't shown to be an elite defender at Overtime Elite, but you can tell the desire is there, the size is there, and I think that playing as a team and as a part of the defense, he absolutely will have the ability. He has the athleticism, and if nothing else, something that we've noticed, if you're a really good athlete in Oates' system, it often can help sometimes mask a little bit of the ineptitude of your true ability on defense, right? So I would suspect he's going to be a decent defender. And at the end of the day, if you can be a pretty good defender and knock down open shots, that's really all Nate wants. Be a defender and knock down shots. That's the way to play in a Nate Oates system. And I think that Cunningham has that ability. So simply put, I think he'll be okay. And then the last guy. The last guy is somebody that we have heard rumored quite often. And it's a name that is well known around the state of Alabama, Labaron Philon. So Labaron Philon was AAU coached by the same guy that coached Mark Sears. A lot of Bama fans know him, Scott Whittle. And he was originally committed to Auburn back, about a year ago. And then he decommitted from Auburn after Wes Flanagan left, and committed to Kansas. And if you were in the know at all, or had any sources close to the university or close to this recruiting situation, there were reports that Philon wanted to be at Bama. He wanted to be at Bama. Depending on who you speak to, he wanted to be at Bama before he even committed to Auburn. And potentially the commitment to Auburn, again, depending upon who you ask, could have even been an upset at Bama and that he was never truly going to go to Auburn. That may just be Bama fans talking. That may be people that don't fully know. I'm just going to say what happened. There are people out there, and I'm actually a little inclined to believe it based on some information that I've heard. But either way, there's some information to suggest that Philon wanted to be at Bama from the word go. But at the time, Alabama was pursuing some other recruits and was trying to figure out how the roster was going to be constructed for this season. So Philon stayed committed to Kansas. And then as the recruitments continued on and the transfer portal started opening up, you started seeing some different guys from last season's team enter the portal. A lot of them were suspected. And then the final one that entered was Muhammad Wagi. Again, this was suspected. I had heard from a couple of people that it might not happen. Then I heard from a couple of sources saying, yes, it's going to happen. From everything I know, he's gone. And then once he actually enters the portal, that opens up that 13th and final spot that Alabama had not used and did not have any additional transfers that they absolutely required, let's say, or absolutely needed. And so it was, who's going to get that final spot? And Philon's name started popping back up. It's, hey, if Alabama will let me commit with that spot, I'll decommit from Kansas right now. I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but from what I heard, it was basically a standpoint of, and this is, I've heard it from multiple people that they heard similar. Philon was basically of the mindset, if Alabama will let me commit, if that is a committable offer, I'm coming. And so then you start hearing that rumor, like I said, not too long after after the Wiggy news officially drops, because again, now they have the open spot. Then Philon officially asks out of his national letter of intent from Kansas, and it's like, it's probably going to happen. And then, just a couple of days later, Philon officially commits to Alabama. So the reason why this is so important, right? Philon, first and foremost, originally from Mobile, he was an elite scorer in Mobile. There's no other way to say it. He averaged like 35 points a game his junior season. Then he goes to Link Academy, and this is the boarding school out of Missouri, I believe. And another basketball powerhouse, very similar to Prolific Prep. Actually, this season, Prolific Prep and Link Academy played each other. There's some YouTube highlights of that. If you have not seen it, I really recommend. Philon got some big minutes. Derrion Reid, Aiden, all of our guys that I've discussed in this episode outside of Naas Cunningham actually played very large minutes in this game. So I would really recommend you checking it out if you have not. The highlights are up on YouTube. And so that is, Link Academy, another huge basketball boarding private school. And so it's big, right? You have another Alabama guy. So if Mark Sears comes back, you have two Alabama guys, depending upon how you want to consider Chris Youngblood, since he was officially born in Tuscaloosa. Technically, three Alabama guys on this coming roster. Again, that's something that you haven't seen out of Nate because it isn't a forced thing, right? He hasn't been taking Alabama guys just for the sake of saying he has an Alabama guy on the roster. But if they fit his skill set and fit what he's looking to do, like a Mark Sears, perfect skill set from Alabama, of course you want to have a guy that's local to the state. There's a little extra that they bring to a rivalry, or there's a little extra that they understand, or maybe they're very familiar with the traditions, or very, very familiar with the campus. They've always wanted to play there, right? Those are really, really big things when you're talking about college athletics. So you absolutely will take these guys. It's just you don't want to lower your standards just so that you can take them. And so I think Philon's a perfect example of the spot became available, and it became available at a time that Alabama had a spot that they needed to fill, and having a backup guard is absolutely something that Alabama needs, right? So if Sears comes back, Philon's really your third point guard. You're right. You got Mark Sears, Aiden Holloway, and now Philon. But either way, I think that Philon will be a huge addition to this team. I think that he potentially will probably play a few more minutes than Naas Cunningham. And I think the only reason that those more minutes is the speed at which we play and how Alabama likes to play additional guards versus I think with Naas Cunningham's spot, that spot is really going to be more of a wing spot, and he's going to be sitting behind Derrion Reid. You got Youngblood, you got Millette, you got Reitzel, right? You've got a few more guys that are going to be playing ahead of him in that spot, and really Naas is going to fit more of that three. He could possibly play the two, but I really think he's best fit as a three in Nate's system. So I just think that Philon will be better suited in our system, and I think he probably will get a few extra minutes. I think that will really just work out to, maybe an additional 2 to 3 minutes a game. I'm not saying that Philon is going to be in every game. I think very similar to what I said about Cunningham, there is a very, very good chance that we see Philon or Cunningham playing, right? They're going to play in some of the early season games, especially some of your lower level games, or games that Alabama gets up, or especially just in the non-conference in general, they will be playing. And they'll probably play in some of the early conference games. And then as we work our way through the conference slate, it will be determined based on injuries how much people actually play. Injuries and the performance on the court. So it would not shock me at all if both of these guys played a decent bit early and maybe not as much late, right? Unless the certain game brought its need, right? And again, I'm going to bring up a Cosby. Cosby contributed later in games early in the season, and then the only game he really came in super early was like your Ole Miss game, right? Cosby comes in, hits some threes, so he absolutely contributed in an SEC game and was important, but was not the same contributor later in the season at all compared to what he was early in the season. Even though he was obviously in later on in games when they were a little bit more out of reach, he still got substantially more minutes early season compared to late. I think both of these guys are a perfect example of that. Neither Philon nor Cunningham do I expect to be one and done. I think these are at least 2 to 3 year guys. Obviously, in today's climate, with the way college basketball is, I think that these are guys that you hope stay around, because I hope that they fully understand the role that they're going to be playing in this team and are not expecting themselves to be the number one option. I think that they're smart enough to know that. But, that is the big thing, is these are the kind of guys that are really, really good at bolstering your bench and allowing you to go into the next season with guys that know the system, that know what is expected, possibly have had some big wins under their belt, right? They've been through the tournament. They've maybe won the SEC regular season. They know what it takes to be able to win those games, because that's really what helps bolster the next teams, right? When you can bring back guys that understand what it takes to truly win, it allows the next team to be that much better, right? So Naas Cunningham and Philon, I think, will contribute this season. I'm not expecting them to be the main contributors on the team, but I think they will contribute. But I think the part that I'm most looking for out of Naas and Philon is just some of the glimmers of what to look forward to, because I think where you're really going to see Cunningham and Philon shine is not going to be in the 24-25 season. It's going to be in the 25-26 season. And so I think that's really what you have to look forward to when you're talking about these guys. Again, I think they will contribute this season. I think they are both very good players. We'll go through the rankings real quick. So Philon is nationally 34th in the country, as low as 30th, as high as 37th. And as I mentioned with Cunningham, his industry composite is a 47. He's as low as 39 via 24/7, and actually as high as 62 on ESPN. So Cunningham is a guy that a lot of people are very unsure of, right? At his position, he's somewhere between 12th and 21st, right? So it's a situation where Cunningham is one that even the experts are a little unsure of what to expect out of him, and so I think that it's more of a wait and see, watch and see, because I think that he has some good things ahead of him, and we're just going to have to watch the games. So that is what I wanted to mention about our basketball recruiting class for this season. I think that Alabama and Nate Oates, especially Preston Murphy, have done an awesome job recruiting this class. This class also was, partially being recruited by Austin Claunch, new head coach at UTSA now. So really props to them, right? Alabama put together a really good class. They filled some of the needs that were really, really important. They also, brought in the transfer portal class that we talked about last episode. So I think that the combination of that transfer portal class, this incoming freshman class, and then all the returning guys that we have returning, hopefully Mark Sears and Jaron Stevenson, again, we will know that very, very shortly. But as soon as we, all of these guys, I think, are putting together what will be a preseason top 5 team. And if Mark Sears returns, they will have a real shot at being the preseason number 1 team in the country. I think it will be between Alabama and Kansas for who holds the top spot going into next season. So there's a lot to be looking forward to. Again, I will be breaking down the schedule and what to expect for who Alabama has on the schedule via non-conference and conference, as well as what the decisions were out of Jaron Stevenson and Mark Sears. Again, I'll record that next week after we fully know all of these decisions, and I will be putting it out. So if you are interested in all the content, please like, subscribe. I really appreciate all the new subscribers that are finding the content. This will continue through the summer. I have not written any recent articles for the Substack online, but actually in the middle of June, I'm going to be doing some traveling, and I have some plans to do full write-ups on each of these players while on the plane rides on my travels. So I'm actually going to be doing the write-ups to accompany the transfer portal and incoming freshman classes that will be coming out here, hopefully later June, beginning of July. So if you'll just stay in touch, there will be content continuing to come out, and then obviously we'll ramp up as we get closer to football season and basketball season. I will be putting out some additional content for football. Spring football isn't as interesting to me because we don't exactly know the depth charts and rosters, etc. So I'm not as much into spring football as some people, but obviously I will be covering the games as they occur, breaking those down. So if you are interested in all the Alabama content, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And I will see everybody in the next one. Peace.